The dog is in the water before Rena is even out of the truck, and that is the thing nobody warned her about, that a Chesapeake Bay retriever will choose a rotted black piling under a dead cannery and swim to it at first light as if a voice she cannot hear has been calling him there all night. His name is Fairy, and he is broad through the chest and the color of wet cedar. Bred from a kennel line meant to break ice and bring back drowned ducks before he washed out for being too gentle with the birds, and right now he is treading the gray tidewater in a slow circle around one pile of the old shucking floor, pawing at it, mouthing the slime off it, fixing the whole weight of his attention on a single rotted post the way a compass needle fixes on north. Rena stands on the broken dock with her boots in the frost and watches him and feels the back of her neck go cold, because she is 23 years old and she has learned the hard way that when this dog locks onto one spot like that, there is always a reason waiting underneath it. The cannery behind her is enormous and sagging and silver gray with 100 years of salt. A long tin-roofed shed of weathered cypress thrown out over the marsh on a forest of pilings, its loading doors hanging off their tracks, its windows blown out to empty squares of morning sky, the painted ghost of words still legible across the gable end if you tilt your head. Tidewater Oyster and Packing CO. EST $18.99, she paid $10 for it. $10 at the county tax sale, the only bidder in a folding chair in a cold courthouse basement that smelled of floor wax and old coffee, where a kindly, tired man named Mr. Easton ran the sale off a clipboard and read the parcel number out twice to an empty room before her hand went up. He had looked at her over his reading glasses then, at the worn coat and the dog waiting just outside the glass doors, and he had not laughed exactly, but he had leaned across the table and lowered his voice the way a man does when he means to do you a kindness. He told her she was buying 120 feet of firewood standing on stilts over the bay, that the building had been condemned since before she was born, that the pilings were soft and the roof was a sieve, and the county had carried it on the books as worthless for 40 years for the simple reason that it was worthless. He told her, gently, certainly, the way everyone in her life had always been certain about her, that whatever that cannery ever held had been carried off, scavenged, or rotted away to nothing 2 long generations back, and that there was not a soul on the eastern shore who would give her $1 for the salvage. He was not unkind. He was only wrong, though neither of them could know that yet, and he would be the first of the doubters and not the last. Rena had thanked him and taken the deed and not argued, because arguing was never her way, and because she had nowhere else on this earth to be. And a worthless thing that is yours is still a roof, and she had not had a roof in a long time. She had been sleeping in the truck for 11 weeks by then. Her whole life fit behind the bench seat, a duffel of clothes, a milk crate of books, a cast-iron pan, a photograph of a woman who had been kind to her once, and Fairy, always Fairy. 100 pounds of devotion that the shelter had nearly put down because nobody adopts the big old dogs, the ones that lean their whole weight against your leg and look at you like you are the last warm thing in the world. She had walked into that shelter to escape a rainstorm and walked out with a dog she could not afford. And that, she thinks now, watching him circle the piling, is the only decision in her recent life she has never once regretted. The photograph behind the bench seat is of a woman named Miss Ada, who fostered Rena for 2 years when she was 9 and 10, the only 2 years of her childhood that ever felt like a held breath instead of a fall. Miss Ada had a porch and a kettle and a way of saying a girl's name like it was worth saying. And she had taught Rena to read tide charts and bake cornbread and tell a kind man from a careless one. And then Miss Ada's heart had quit one winter night, and Rena had been moved by morning to a house across the county. The kettle and the porch and the worth of her name all left behind in a single black bag. She has carried the photograph through 9 homes since. She has learned from Miss Ada and from her absence both the one lesson that governs everything Rena does, which is that the only thing worth having is the thing you give to somebody who has nothing, the way it was given to her, and that a debt of that kind is the only debt a person should be in a hurry to pay. She does not know it yet, standing on the coal dock watching her dog. But that lesson is about to be tested against more money than she has ever seen in her life. She had aged out of the foster system in Baltimore at 18 with a garbage bag and a bus pass and a caseworker's tired good luck, and the city had not had a place for her any more than the 11 homes before it had. She had cleaned motel rooms on the highway, stripping beds and scrubbing other people's lives off the porcelain for a wage that never quite became a deposit. She had gutted fish on a packing line on the cold end of a pier until her hands cracked and the smell would not wash out, and through all of it she had kept a coffee can on the dash of the truck and fed it what she could, a 5 here, a 10 there, the loose change from a shift, until it held a few $100s, which is not much money to most of the world, but was, to Rena, the entire weight of her freedom, the only thing standing between her and the long slide back into other people's mercy. She had never owned a thing in her life that someone could not take away from her on a moment's notice, and she had grown tired, bone tired, of being the girl who is always one bad week from the curb. So when she saw the county notice taped in the window of a gas station, a list of tax foreclosed parcels, sale by sealed bid or open auction, minimum $10, she had read it the way a drowning person reads the word land. She had driven south down the spine of the eastern shore with the windows cracked for the dog, past the chicken houses and the soybean stubble and the long flat fields going silver in the autumn, looking for a place cheap enough to be hers, somewhere the world had stopped wanting. Because a place the world has stopped wanting is the only kind of place that will ever let a girl like her in the door. And here it is, a dead oyster cannery on a forgotten neck of the Chesapeake, where the marsh grass hisses in the wind and the gulls wheel over the wreck of the packing fleet half sunk in the mud, and her dog will not come out of the water. If you are new here, welcome to Pet Road Stories. We tell the quiet, true-feeling stories of people the world walked past, the ones who buy the building nobody wanted, with the animal nobody wanted, and find behind a sealed wall or under a rotted floor the thing everybody swore was gone. Settle in. Pour something warm. Stay with Rena and her good gray dog out here on the cold water, because what Fairy has found under that piling is going to undo every word the clerk said over that $10 deed. Rena whistles him in, and Fairy comes, reluctant, dragging his attention behind him like a boat dragging an anchor, and she towels the bay off his great trembling shoulders and tells him there is nothing out there, that the man at the courthouse said so, that the place was emptied lifetimes ago. Fairy does not believe her. That first night she makes the loft livable the only way she knows, which is small and warm and one corner at a time. She sweeps a clean square of the old plank floor up under the dry side of the roof where the gable still keeps the weather out, and she sets up her camp stove on an upturned crate and boils water for tea and feeds the dog from the cast iron pan. And she hangs a tarp to cut the draft and lays out the blankets in a nest and pins the photograph of the kind woman to a nail in the wall, so that the loft, for the first time, has something in it that is hers. Outside, the tide breathes in and out under the floor with a sound like a great slow animal, and the wind finds every gap in the old cypress and sings through it. And the gulls quiet at dusk, and the herons come stalking the shallows on their stilt legs, and Rena lies in the dark, listening to a building that has been holding its breath for 70 years begin, very slightly, to let it out. She thinks she could be happy here. She has learned to keep that thought small, the way you keep a coal banked, because hope has a way of being taken from her too. By the gray light of the next morning, Ferry is gone from the nest of blankets she made him in the dry corner of the loft, and she finds him already in the water, already circling, already pawing the same black piling under the same collapsed corner of the old shucking floor, and that is day 1 of 14. She starts to keep count without meaning to. She tells herself it is a current thing, a fish thing, an old dog stubbornness thing, that he has simply decided this piling is his and will defend it against the tide. But there is a way a working dog looks when he is playing, and a different way entirely when he is working, and Ferry is working. He does not bark. He does not splash. He treads the cold water in a tight, businesslike circle, and he dives again and again, pushing his blunt nose down along the slick of the pile into the dark beneath the floor. And he comes up streaming and gasping and goes straight back down. And on the 3rd day he surfaces with a long rusted iron strap clamped in his jaws, a piece of banding off a crate, barnacle-crusted and older than she is, and he swims it to her and lays it at her feet on the dock the way his breeding tells him to lay a bird, soft-mouthed, undamaged, a thing brought back from the deep and given over. She turns the strap in her hands a long time. The marsh wind goes through her coat. She does not know yet what it means, but she knows that a thing like this does not float up by itself, that something down there in the dark, under the shucking floor, has begun, after 70 years, to let go of what it was holding. She tries, those first days, to call him off it. She walks him down the marsh road to tire him. She throws the old tennis ball she keeps in the truck until her arm aches. She leaves his breakfast in the bowl up in the loft where it is warm. None of it works. Ferry will eat hurriedly with one eye on the water, and then he is back at the dock's edge, whining low in his chest until she lets him in, and he swims straight out to the same piling as if it were a job he has been hired for and means to finish. She has known this dog long enough to read every line of him, and what she reads now is not play and not madness, but a patient, aching certainty. The look he gets when there is a thing that needs doing and no one but him to do it. By the 6th day her own certainty has caught his. She has stopped telling him there is nothing there. The old waterman finds her on the 4th day. His name is Otis Pruitt, and he is 81 and bent like a fishhook, and he poles a flat skiff up the gut at the lowest part of the tide. And he ties off at her ruined dock without asking, and stands looking up at the Cannery for a while before he looks at her. He tells her he shucked oysters in that house as a boy, that his daddy shucked there, that the whole town shucked there once, 300 knives going at once down the long benches and the steam rolling out the doors in winter. And then the beds went bad, and the company went broke, and the doors closed in the cold spring of 1953, and never opened again. He says it the way old men say the names of the dead. And then he sees Ferry out in the water working the piling, and something moves across his weathered face, and he goes quiet, and he says only that the dog is over the old shucking floor, over where the pay window used to be, and that she ought to let the place keep its secrets because some things were boarded up for good reasons. Rena asks him what reasons. Otis does not answer. He poles his skiff back down the gut and leaves her with the gulls and the wind and a question hanging in the cold. But she has watched her dog too long to ignore him now, and the next morning she wades out at dead low water in waders 2 sizes too big, the cold of the bay reaching through the rubber to find her shins, and she puts her own hands on the piling Ferry has chosen. The dog goes still beside her in the water the way he never does and watches her hands. And she feels it, not a piling at all, not entirely. But the corner post of a small framed room built down inside the larger one, a box of a room walled off under the shucking floor with its planks driven tight and tarred and silted over until it read as nothing but more wreck. Her fingers find the seam where one wall meets another at a true right angle, find the heads of square-cut nails set close as stitches, find a band of pitch laid on so thick and so deliberate that no storm and no accident put it there. A man put it there, on his knees in the dark at low water, sealing something in. The pay office, the little sealed room where, Otis will tell her later, the bookkeeper sat behind an iron grill and counted out the week's wages in silver to 300 shuckers every Saturday of every season for 54 years, boarded up, tarred shut, swallowed by the mud and the tide and 7 decades of the town agreeing, the way towns do, to forget, and her dog will not leave it. He brings her things from it as the days go on and the tide works at what his pawing is loosened. He brings her a green glass bottle. He brings her a brass button stamped with an anchor. On the 9th day he brings her, swimming high and proud with his head thrown back, a single coin, black with tarnish, that she scrubs with her thumb on the dock until a worn eagle shows through. And she sits down hard on the cold boards because she does not need an expert to tell her that it is gold. But she gets one anyway, because Rena is the kind of honest that costs her, the kind that was beaten into her by a childhood of being blamed for things she did not take. She drives 40 miles to the County Historical Society with the coin wrapped in a sock in her pocket and lays it on the desk of a soft-spoken woman named Della Voss, who appraises maritime antiquities for the State Museum and who goes very quiet when she sees it and asks Rena in a careful voice exactly where it came from. Della comes back with her the next day in a mud-spattered field car with calipers and cotton gloves and a camera and a reverence Rena does not yet understand, and on the 11th and 12th days, working only in the 2-hour windows at the bottom of every tide when the sealed room stands clear of the water, the two of them pry the tarred boards off the pay office, one black plank at a time. It is slow, cold, careful work. Each plank comes away with a sucking groan and a breath of trapped air gone sour and ancient, the breath of a room that has been holding it since before either of them was born. And Della photographs every layer before they touch it and will not let Rena hurry, because some things, she says, you only get to open once. And the whole time, Ferry stands guard on the dock above them, soaked and shivering and refusing every towel, refusing to come up to the loft, refusing to do anything but watch the hole he opened, his great head hung over the edge and his ears forward, like a dog at a den he has run his quarry to ground in and will not leave until the digging is done. And what is inside the pay office of the Tidewater Oyster and Packing Company has not seen daylight since the spring the doors closed in 1953. The iron grill rusted to lace, the bookkeeper's high desk swollen and black but standing, the wall of pigeonholes still stuffed with the ledgers, the great leather paybooks gone hard as slate but legible inside, where the salt could not reach the middle pages, and bolted to the floor behind the desk, a low iron strongbox, and inside the strongbox, wrapped in oilcloth that crumbles at a touch, the things the town swore were carried off 2 generations ago. A canvas sack of gold double eagles and half eagles, the season's final payroll that was minted and counted and never paid out, a tin box of the company's deeds, the deeds to the oyster grounds themselves, the bottom leases to 1,000 acres of bay that the families of this town had worked since before the war, and a single folded letter in the bookkeeper's careful hand. Dated the last week the cannery breathed. Delavant sits back on her heels in the muck with the gold in her lap and says very quietly that she will need to be conservative, that she will need to date it all properly, but that the coin alone, by weight and by date and by rarity, runs to something north of $190,000, and that the deeds to living, leasable, harvestable oyster bottom could be worth many times that to the families they belong to if those families can still be found. Rena does not say anything for a long time. The figure does not feel real to her. It is a number out of a different person's life, and she finds she cannot hold it in her head, so she lets it go and reaches instead for the one thing in that drowned little room that she can understand, which is the letter. She sits down on an overturned crate in the wrecked office her dog found. With the gray tide coming back up cold around the pilings and the light going long and gold across the water through the broken wall, and she unfolds the brittle pages with hands that have started, without her permission, to shake. The bookkeeper's name was Harlan Teague. Della has found him already in the paybooks. A man who kept the company's accounts for 41 years in a hand so neat it looks printed, who lived alone in a room over the chandlery and had no wife and no children that anyone recorded, who was, by every account in the ledgers, the sort of quiet, careful, overlooked old man that a busy town forgets it depends on. He wrote the letter the week the company failed, and it is not a treasure map, and it is not a confession. It is an apology. He writes that the beds went bad and the buyers stopped coming and the bank called the note, and that on the last Saturday there was no money to make payroll, and that 300 families who had given their whole lives to the knife and the bench went home that spring with nothing. He writes that he could not bear it. He writes that he took the last good payroll silver that had come in before the end, and the company's own gold reserve, and the deeds to the oyster grounds, which by the failure of the company were meant to revert to the bank and the speculators, and that he sealed them all into the pay office with his own hands, behind the floor, in the dark, where the bank could not take them and the speculators could not buy them, so that one day, when the bay healed and someone came back, the grounds would still belong to the people who had always worked them, and the silver would still be here to pay a debt that the company had run out of time to pay. He writes that he knew he might not live to see it. He asks, in the last line, only that whoever finds this give it back to the people of the town, by name, from the books, and let no man have it who sees in it only money. He signs it, and under his signature he has written the date the doors closed, and under the date, in a hand gone shaky, the words, "The tide always brings it back." Rena reads it twice, And then she folds it closed against her chest and she cries, there on the crate in the rising dark, for a man she will never meet who hid a fortune in the cold, not to keep it, but to keep it safe, who could not bear that the people he had counted out wages to every Saturday for 40 years should go home empty, who built his last act not around what he was owed, but around what he owed. She cries because she knows him. She knows exactly the shape of a person the world looks straight through. The careful, quiet ones who keep everyone else's accounts and ask for nothing and are forgotten the moment they are gone. And she understands. Sitting in his ruined office with his gold at her feet and his letter against her heart, that Harlan Teague did not seal this room for the town at all. Not really. He sealed it for whoever would come. He sealed it on faith, into the dark, for a stranger 70 years away, the way Miss Ada once handed a porch and a kettle to a girl she had no reason to love. The way kindness is only ever handed forward to someone who has not earned it and cannot pay it back. And Ferry, who has not left the dock above her in 14 days, comes down the broken steps then on his big, careful feet and presses his wet head into her lap and stays there, and the two of them sit a long time in the going dark while the tide comes up around the place that has been waiting all this while for someone honest enough to find it. If this story has found you the way Rena found that letter, if you have ever loved an animal who saw something you could not and would not let you walk away from it, do me a small kindness and tap that subscribe button and leave a heart in the comments for Ferry, the gentle dog nobody wanted who would not leave the water. It helps these quiet stories reach the people who need them. Now stay with me, because what Rena does next is the part the clerk never could have guessed. She could have kept it. A lawyer would tell her, later, that she had every legal right to most of it. The find was on her deed, in her building, lawfully bought at a clean county sale, with no living company to claim it, and the bank that held the old note long since dissolved. She could have taken the gold and the deeds and driven away rich and never looked back, and no court in the state would have stopped her. But Rena has spent her whole life being the person things were taken from, and she finds she cannot become the person who takes. So she does what Harlan Teague asked. She opens the great salt-stiffened paybooks on the bookkeeper's own desk, the leather covers gone hard as slate, but the middle pages still legible where the salt could not reach. And with Della's help and a magnifying glass and a great deal of patience, she copies out the names, 300 families, the Shuckers and the Cullers and the Tongers and the Watermen, every soul who was owed wages the spring the doors closed, each name set down beside the small, unpaid sum in Harlan Teague's careful column. And then she begins, patiently, in a town that has mostly forgotten it ever had a cannery, to find their grandchildren. It is slow work and strange work, the work of bringing the dead back into a town's memory one supper table at a time. She sits in the loft of an evening with a paybook and the county phone listings and a county map, and she matches old names to mailboxes. And she drives the marsh roads with Ferry on the bench seat and knocks on doors and stands on porches, explaining a thing nobody believes until she opens the envelope. She learns the town through its debts. She learns that the Stows and the Cobbs and the Pruitts and the Quillans go back 6 generations on this water, that half the names in the book still hang on mailboxes within 10 miles. That the cannery is not as forgotten as it pretends to be. It is only grieved, the way you stop saying a name out loud because saying it hurts. She gives the grief somewhere to go. She keeps for herself only what the letter and the law together make plainly hers, a finder's portion of the coin, enough to make the cannery sound again, enough to put a real roof over the loft and pilings under the dock that will hold, enough that for the first time since she was a child, Rena has a door that locks and is her own, and the rest she gives back. The town does not believe her at first. A girl who slept in a truck, handing back a fortune she could keep, it is not a thing people credit, and the word goes around that she is simple, or scheming, or both. But then the families start coming. An old woman named Sadie Cobb, whose mother shucked at the cannery, comes to the dock and is handed a sealed envelope with her family name written across it in Harlan Teague's 70-year-old hand, and when she opens it and finds the silver that was owed her mother, she sits down on the cold boards and weeps. And the town starts to turn. They come with what they have, the way Baytowns do. A waterman named Lonnie Stowe reshingles the whole cannery roof for free over 3 Saturdays because his grandfather's name was in the paybook, and he brings his 2 sons to hand up the bundles, and at noon they all sit on the dock and eat sandwiches with their boots hanging over the water while Ferry goes from man to man collecting the crusts. A retired carpenter named Pratt, who has not worked in years, drives new pilings under the dock with a borrowed barge and a young man's stubbornness, and will not take $1, and says only that he has wanted an excuse to be useful for a long time. The church ladies start a Tuesday supper in the loft and bring covered dishes, crab cakes and stewed tomatoes and pound cake under wax paper. And they fuss over how thin the girl is and load her plate twice. The hardware store sends paint at cost and then quietly forgets to send the bill. A man Rena has never met spends a weekend rehanging the great loading doors on new track so that they roll wide and easy the way they did when the steam poured out of them. And when they roll for the first time, the whole work crew stops and watches the daylight flood into the long shed, and nobody says anything because there is nothing to say. By midsummer, the dead cannery is loud with hammers and voices and the smell of cut cedar and coffee for the first time since 1953. And there are children running the length of the shucking floor where their great-grandfathers stood. And there is Rena in the middle of it all, with a deed in a drawer and a name that people say kindly now. And there is Ferry, asleep in a long bar of sun on the warm new boards, finally out of the water, his big sides rising and falling, his work done. If you have a dog like that, a good and stubborn one who would have led you out onto that cold water too, tell me about him in the comments, and while you are there, give this video a like so the people who still believe in quiet kindness can find their way to it. There is one more thing, and it is the part of this story that the town will tell longest. Otis Pruitt, the old waterman who poled up the gut that 4th day and told her to leave the place at secrets, Otis is the last living soul who shucked at that cannery the spring it closed. He was 19 years old in 1953, a boy on the end bench. And he stood in the cold the last Saturday with the others and was sent home without his pay, and for 70 years he has told anyone who would listen that the pay window was emptied clean the day the doors shut, that he watched the bank's men carry the strong boxes out to a truck, that there was never 1 cent left in that house for anybody. He believed it. He had built his whole long bitterness on it. And so when Rena sends word that there is an envelope at the cannery with the name Pruitt written on it in Harlan Teague's hand, old Otis pulls up the gut one more time, slow against the tide, and he climbs the new steps onto the dock his neighbors rebuilt, and Ferry, who has guarded that floor for 14 days and growled at no one, walks over and leans his whole 100 pounds gently against the old man's leg. Rena puts the envelope in his shaking hands. Inside is the silver his 19-year-old self was owed, and a second coin besides, and the page from the paybook with his father's name and his own beside it, marked unpaid in the careful hand of a man dead 60 years. Otis stands on the dock a long time, the envelope trembling in his old hand, the page with his father's name and his own held up close to his failing eyes. The gulls wheel. The marsh hisses. His neighbors go quiet around him, the hammers stilled, the children hushed by something in the air they are too young to name. And then he says, in the flat. Plain voice old watermen use for the truest things. That he stood on the bank the spring the doors closed and watched the bank's men load their truck and drive it off up the marsh road. And that from that day to this one, he told everybody who would listen that the pay window was emptied clean, that there was never one red cent left in that house for any of them, that they had all been robbed and might as well stop grieving over money that was gone. He helped tell that story. The whole town built its bitterness on it, and he laid the first stone. He believed it down to the bone for 70 years. And he was wrong. He says it plain, the way old watermen say a true thing, and then he bends down, slowly, with one hand on the dog's broad back to steady himself, and he presses his forehead to Fairy's wet head and thanks the gentle washed-out retriever for finding what 300 grieving families and 70 years of forgetting had given up for gone. By the time the leaves turn the next fall, the Tidewater Oyster and Packing Company is alive again, not as a cannery, but as something better. A public dock and a winter market where the watermen sell their catch off the same long benches their great-grandfathers shucked at, where the school brings children to see the old paybooks under glass with Harlan Teague's letter framed beside them, where the deeds to the oyster grounds, recorded and returned, have put 100 families back onto Bay Bottom that is theirs again by right. Rena lives in the loft above it with the doors that lock and the dog that sleeps at the foot of her bed, and on the coldest mornings she still finds him gone, down at the water's edge, looking out over the place he saved, and she goes down and sits beside him in the frost with her hand on his graying head, and they watch the tide come in. She thinks, on those mornings, about what Harlan Teague wrote in his shaking hand at the bottom of that letter, and she has come to believe it is the truest thing anyone ever told her about the world, that what is given away in love is never really lost, the tide always brings it back. So tell me, before you go, if you had been the one sleeping in that truck, the only bidder on a dead cannery, and your dog had swum out to that one black piling and would not come back, would you have waded out after him into the cold? Or would you have believed the man who said there was nothing left? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if Rena and Fairy warmed something in you today, subscribe to Pet Road Stories and stay with us, because next week there is another forgotten place, and another loyal animal, and another quiet soul the world walked past, waiting at the end of another road for someone finally to come find them.